I
recognized.
would ask unanimous consent to vacate the quorum call.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about the issue of secret law that Senator Udall and I, were both members of the Intelligence Committee, have been working on for quite some time, and then I'm going to yield to our friend, the distinguished chair of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Feinstein, for a colloquy. Mr. President, what this issue is all about is I believe there are two Patriot Acts in America. The first is the text of the law itself, and the second is the government's secret interpretation of what they believe the law means. And as an example, several years ago, Americans woke up to learn that the Bush administration had been secretly claiming for years that warrantless wiretapping was legal. This disclosure greatly undermined the public's trust in the Department of Justice and our national intelligence agencies, and it took Congress and the executive branch years to sort the situation out. I believe, Mr. President, that the American people will also be extremely surprised when they learn how the Patriot Act is secretly being interpreted, and I believe one consequence will be an erosion of public confidence that makes it more difficult for our critically important national intelligence agencies to function effectively. And as someone who served on the Intelligence Committee for 10 years, sitting right next to Senator Feinstein, I don't want to see that happen. Let me yield now to Senator Udall. He will also have brief remarks, any colleagues who want to speak, and then Senator Feinstein will lead us in the discussion of how we will be moving forward. So I want to yield to Senator Udall, who has been an invaluable member of the Intelligence Committee. He and I have worked on this since the day he joined our committee, and I am so appreciative of his involvement.
Senator from Colorado.
I thank the senator from Oregon for his kind words. I also want to echo his remarks about the leadership of the chairwoman of the Intelligence Committee and her focus on keeping our country safe and our citizens protected. I did also want to make the point that, like my colleague from Oregon, I also oppose reauthorization of the expiring provisions in the Patriot Act without significant reforms, and I believe it's critical that the administration make public its interpretation of the Patriot Act so that members of Congress and the public are not kept in the dark.
Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to thank both Senator Wyden and Senator Udall for their comments. And we did have a meeting last night. We did discuss this thoroughly. And the decision was that we would enter into this colloquy. So I would like to begin it, if I may. These senators and I, along with the junior senator from Oregon, Senator Merkley, and the senator from New Mexico, Senator Tom Udall, and, the senator from New Mexico, Mark Udall, and the senator from Rhode Island, Mr. Whitehouse, met last night to discuss this amendment, the legal interpretation of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act provisions, and how these provisions are implemented. I very much appreciate the strong views that Senator Wyden and Senator Udall have in this area, and believe that they are raising a serious and important point as to how exactly these authorities are carried out. I believe we are also all in agreement that these are important counterterrorism authorities and have contributed to the security of our nation.
Mr. President, I have enormous respect for my special friend from California, the distinguished chair of the Intelligence Committee. I have sat next to her literally for more than a decade. We agree on virtually all of these issues, but this is an area where we have had a difference of opinion. I have said that I wouldn't support a long-term reauthorization of the Patriot Act without significant reforms, particularly in this area. I am especially troubled by the fact that the U.S. government's official interpretation of the Patriot Act is secret, and I believe, Mr. President, that a significant gap has developed now between what the public thinks the law says and what the government secretly claims it says. That is why I and my colleagues from Oregon and Colorado and New Mexico have proposed an amendment that would make these legal interpretations public.
President.
Can you read that, please?
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to engage in a colloquy between Senators Udall, Feinstein, and Merkley.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me say once again that, like my colleague from Oregon, I oppose reauthorization of the existing provisions that we've been debating here on the floor of the Patriot Act without significant reforms. I also have to say I believe it's critical that the administration make public its interpretation of the Patriot Act so that members of Congress and our public are not kept in the dark. I think that's the important work we have in front of us, and we have a real opportunity to accomplish those goals.
Mr. President?
From California.
I might respond. I have agreed that these are important issues and that the Intelligence Committee, which is charged with carrying out oversight over the 16 various intelligence agencies of what's called the intelligence community, should be carried out forthrightly. I also believe that the place to do it is in the Intelligence Committee itself. And I have said to these distinguished senators that it would be my intention to call together a hearing as soon as we come back from the Memorial Day break with the intelligence community agencies, the senior policymakers, and the Department of Justice to make sure that the committee is comfortable with the FISA programs and to make changes if changes are needed. We will do that. So it would be my intention to have these hearings completed before the committee considers the fiscal year 12 intelligence authorization bill so that any amendments to FISA can be considered at that time. And the fact is that we do not usually have amendments to the intelligence authorization bill, but the majority leader, I believe, will do his best to secure a future commitment, if such is needed, for a vote on any amendment. I have not agreed to support any amendment because at this stage it is hypothetical, and we need to look very deeply into what these senators have said and pointed out last night with specificity and get the response to it from the Intelligence Committee, have both sides hear it, and then make a decision that's based not only on civil liberties but also on the necessity to keep our country safe. And I believe we can do that. I'm very appreciative of their agreement to enter into this colloquy.
Well, I thank the distinguished chair of the Intelligence Committee for proposing this course of action for addressing the secret law issue. Obviously, colleagues would like more information on that, and they're going to be in a position to know that the Intelligence Committee is going to be examining it closely, and just going to describe the next steps from there. Senator Udall and I have discussed this issue with Senator Reid, and Senator Reid indicated to us, to the chair and myself and Senator Udall, that we would have an opportunity through these hearings, and of course any amendments to the bill would be discussed on the Intel authorization, legislation, and that's a matter that obviously has to be classified. But if we were not satisfied, through that process, we would have the ability to offer an amendment, such as our original one, on the floor, and of course the chair would still retain full rights to oppose it, but we would make sure that if this issue of secret law wasn't fixed and that there wasn't an improved process to make more transparent and more open the interpretation of the law, not what are called sources and methods, which are so important to protect our people, we would have an opportunity, if it wasn't corrected in the intelligence community, to come to the floor. And Senator Reid has just indicated to all of us that he would focus on giving us a vote, if we felt it was needed, on another bill, not the intelligence authorization, before September 30th, so that there is a plan to actually get this fixed. That is what is key, and I think at this time I would...
President.
Senator from Colorado.
I think as we begin to end this important colloquy, I want to acknowledge the leadership of Senator Wyden on this important matter. I also want to acknowledge the involvement of the Senator from New Mexico, who's presiding at this moment in time, the Senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley, and the Senator from Rhode Island, Mr. Whitehouse, who've been very involved in bringing this case to the attention of all of us. I want to also thank my good friend from California, the chairwoman of the committee. She's shown great willingness to work with everybody to listen. And I have to say that I expect once the committee examines this issue more closely, that I think many more of our colleagues will want to join us in reforming the law in this area. I think this is important. I do think we can find the right balance between protecting civil liberties and protecting the health and welfare of American citizens.
Mr. President, let me just make one last comment. I also want to express my appreciations to Senator Merkley, who has been an extraordinarily outspoken advocate of our civil liberties and our privacy, and striking a good balance between fighting terror and protecting the rights of our people, and I have so appreciated his leadership on this issue. And let me just kind of sum up. First, I'm very grateful to our chair and pleased with this agreement. The chair has indicated that she believes that those of us who want to reform secret law have raised a serious and important issue. Those are her words. We are grateful for that, because we obviously feel very strongly about it. The chair has said that we would hold hearings promptly to examine the secret law issue, give serious consideration to looking at reforms in the FY12 intelligence authorization bill, and then, per our conversations with the majority leader, if Senator Udall and I felt that it had not been corrected on the intelligence authorization bill, we would have the right to offer, and certainly the chair could oppose it, an amendment here on the floor of the United States Senate on an unrelated bill. And Senator Reid, to his great credit, in an effort to try to resolve this and move it along, said to the three of us that he would be working to do that. So with that, and again our thanks to the chair, all my colleagues on the floor, Senator Merkley, who is not a member of the committee, knows an incredible amount about it, and certainly showed that last night in our discussions, was very helpful. I want to yield to him. But, Madam Chair, with the cooperation that you have shown all of us who are trying to change this, and the efforts of Senator Reid to make sure that if we didn't work it out, we could come back to the floor again, I would withdraw the Wyden-Udall amendment for the time being, and it ought to be clear to everybody here in the United States Senate we are going to continue to prosecute the cause of making more open and accountable the way the government interprets this law, and making sure that the American people have the confidence that the way it's being interpreted is in line with the text of the legislation. And I would yield the floor, Mr. President, and would withdraw at this time the Wyden-Udall amendment.
Mr. President?
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you. And I am deeply appreciative of the dialogue that has just taken place. It was William Pitt in England who commented that the wind and the rain can enter my house, but the king cannot. It captured the spirit and understanding of the balance between personal privacy, personal freedoms, and issues of the Crown regarding maintenance of security. And it was this underpinning that came, this foundation that came in for our Fourth Amendment of our Constitution that lays out clear standards for the protection of privacy and freedoms. So, as we have wrestled with the standards set out in the Patriot Act, a standard which says the government may have access to records that are relevant to an investigation. Now, that term is, on the face, quite broad and expansive, quite a low standard, if you will. But what happens when it's interpreted out of the sight of this chamber, out of the sight of the American people? That is the issue my colleague has raised, and it's a very important issue. And I applaud the Chair of Intelligence for laying out a process whereby we all can wrestle with this issue in an appropriate venue and have a path for amendments in the committee or possibly here in the floor of the Senate, because I do think it is our constitutional responsibility to make sure that the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution is protected, the privacy and freedoms of citizens are protected. Thank you to the Senator from Colorado, my senior colleague who has led this effort from Oregon, my colleague from New Mexico, and thank you to the Chairwoman from California.
Thank you very much, and I believe this concludes our colloquy, and we yield the floor, and I thank the Chair.
The senator from Oregon is recognized.
I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-1082, introduced earlier today.
The clerk will report.
S-1082, a bill to provide for an additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 and for other purposes.
Mr. Leader,
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read 3 times and passed. The motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to the matter be placed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Senator Sessions be recognized to speak for up to 20 minutes for debate only.
Without objection. They're just in the middle.
Mr. President,
The senator from Alabama is recognized.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
The senator is informed we're not in a quorum call.
I thank the Chair. Mr. President, we had an unfortunate series of votes last night, in my opinion, because it was all arranged by our leadership in the Senate to have a series of votes to do nothing. And the reason that's unfortunate is the votes we had dealt with a budget for the United States of America. And our Congress is proceeding forward, the Senate at least, with an idea that they don't have to have a budget. In fact, the majority leader, Senator Reid, said it would be foolish to pass a budget. And as one of the staffers said on background, well, if we pass a budget, we'll have to tell people how much we're going to raise their taxes and talk about spending reductions, and that won't be popular. And what did they do? One of the most incredible things I've ever seen in the Senate. Did they express regret that they couldn't pass a budget? That they would not state for the American people a vision for spending and financial future of America? No. What did they do? They had the majority in the Senate. They called up the budget passed by the House of Representatives, which is a really historic budget, an honest budget that deals fairly and objectively with the challenges we're facing, reduces spending, actually was able to reduce some taxes, and proposed a decade out that the Congress confront Medicare because it's going broke. So what did they do? They called up that budget. Did they call it up to amend it? Did they call it up to offer us a chance to debate it and offer amendments and fix anything anybody didn't like about it? No, that wasn't what was done. They brought it up only with the most limited debate before all four votes. They stacked all four votes on four different budgets and projections and just voted it down. And they voted down every budget that was offered. Now, I have on my desk in my office the President's budget. It's about this thick. It's 4 volumes, hundreds of pages. And it lays out a budget. Every president submits budgets. They have a 500-person Office of Management and Budget staff. Every year they produce a budget. The law requires them to produce a budget. Here it is. This is the code, United States Code annotated. And in this is the law that says the President should submit a budget and the date he should do it. It says that the United States Senate should commence markup in the Budget Committee by April 1st, and the Congress should pass a budget by April 15th. Last I heard, April 15th is long since passed. Now, how do you get a budget out of committee and to the floor of the United States Senate? What are we supposed to do by April 1st? A chairman's supposed to call a markup, and he's supposed to bring up the budget that he proposes, offer it to the Budget Committee. It's open for amendment, change, and debate, and then it's voted on. And a budget should then come out of the committee to the floor of the Senate. It has expedited procedures, but you are allowed to offer amendments in 50 hours of debate, not too much. It does not require the normal 60 votes we have to have for legislation here. It only requires a majority, 50 votes. That's basically designed, frankly, when the people wrote the Budget Act back in the 70s, to allow the majority party to be able to pass a budget, because there were too many filibusters of budgets and no budgets were getting passed. And if you got the majority in the Senate, at least you should be able to produce a budget. So it provides the Democratic majority, the 53 Democratic senators that they have, the opportunity to produce a budget on a partisan basis if it can't be done on a bipartisan basis. So the normal process is you work with your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and if you think a good agreement can be made in a bipartisan fashion, you do so and move a bipartisan budget. I remember last year when Senator Gregg, our Republican ranking member, talked about what his conversation with Senator Conrad, and he said he's not letting me see the budget. It's going to be produced the next morning, and what that means is he's going to produce a partisan budget. He doesn't want our opinion. He's not going to show us what's in his budget until the day of the hearing. So this year we wrote all the Republican members, I'm the ranking member now, we asked the budget chairman to show us his mark 72 hours before the hearing because he hadn't consulted with us, and it appeared he was going to produce a partisan budget. Actually told me that when the date the hearing would come in to mark up his budget, but he did decline to give us any advanced notice or opportunity to see what was in it. All I'm saying is the procedure is set up realistically under the Budget Act to allow the majority party to meet its responsibility to pass a budget. They don't have to have a single Republican vote to pass a budget. It's better if you can get a bipartisan agreement, I think, and oftentimes in the past there have been. But since budgets represent visions for America, oftentimes in recent years they've gone on pretty much a party line, but not 100%. So that's what I would say to it. So the President submitted his budget, and it was roundly criticized around the country, and I was a very severe critic of it. So we offered that budget last night. That was one of the 4 budgets that was offered, and we brought it up. It's the only Democratic budget to be produced. I think the Progressive Caucus produced one in the House, but of course it didn't pass. Had a lot of tax increases and a lot of spending increases in it. Had no chance whatsoever of being passed. I mean, the American people sent us a message last year. They want us to get spending under control. They want us to reduce the size and scope of government. That's what they ask us to do. So the President's budget came up last night, 97-0. Every Democrat voted against the President's budget. Well, they should, because it was unacceptable. I have referred to it as the most irresponsible budget in the history of our country because we are in a deeper financial hole than we've ever been. Now, that's just a fact. And it's not a short-term little problem. It's a problem that's getting worse in the years to come, and so the nation has come to the conclusion, the American people have, not this Senate, the American people have come to the conclusion that we need to change the trajectory of debt that's we're piling on year after year, month after month, day after day, by the billions, trillions, really. So the President's budget as scored by the Congressional Budget Office would produce uncontrolled debt year after year after year in amounts never before contemplated in our country, making the debt trajectory of our current baseline spending worse, not better. I thought everybody understood we had to change and get better. The question was, I thought when we came in with this Congress, the debate would be over how much to change in the right direction. How much could we do to reduce the deficits, put us on a right path? Not the President's budget. It made it worse. According to the Congressional Budget Office, it analyzed his budget and scored it, as we say. The lowest single deficit that budget would produce is $750 billion, 748, I believe. The lowest deficit to be produced under his 10-year budget. President Bush was criticized for spending. The highest budget deficit he's had was $450 billion. That's the highest President Bush had, and he was criticized for that by many of my Democratic colleagues quite vociferously. President Obama is now heading to his third $1,000+ billion budget deficit. 1.2, 1.3, this year is going to be 1.5, it looks like. 1,500 billion. 3 times the size of the President Bush's highest thing. And it doesn't get, as I said, the lowest deficit they projected is 748, and it starts going back up again. And in his 10th year, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the deficit will be $1.2 trillion, $1,200 billion. It's an indefensible, irresponsible budget. I'm stunned that it was presented here and has been widely criticized. Well, it should. And so it was voted down last night. So if you're going to vote down something, shouldn't you offer something in its place? That's what the Fiscal Commission that President Obama appointed said. That was their rule, and that's what they've promoted publicly. If you oppose a budget, you should offer your own. And in fact, after Congressman Ryan, who served on the Fiscal Commission with Mr. Bowles and Senator Simpson as co-chairman, he was a member of it, and he produced a budget, and they gave him great credit. They said it was honest and courageous, and it faced the challenges of America, and it deserved respect, and then said, but anybody that doesn't agree with that should follow our rule, which is show what you would do. So last night, yesterday afternoon, we had the spectacle of Democratic senators hammering and complaining about the Ryan budget, which is the most historic and responsible budget to be produced in decades, in my opinion. Yes, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. It's perfectly acceptable to believe it ought to be amended, but it was a historic, honest attempt at dealing with the fiscal challenges we face and would put us on a financial path to solvency and stability and eliminate the risk that we're facing. Probably should do more, actually, to reduce spending than he proposed. But it was courageous and bold and honest and without gimmicks, and I thought very impressive document. I look forward to debating it and parts of it in our Budget Committee. So what did we have last night? Yesterday, they just voted up, and every Democratic member voted it down. And why? Because he had the gumption to actually suggest that for people 55 and below, that we should begin to create a Medicare system that would be solvent and effective and save Medicare. Because the trustees have reduced the age again, the year again at which it goes insolvent. So they had cleverly thought up this theory Senator Reid had. Senator Schumer was explicit about it. So their theory was they wouldn't bring up their own budget. They wouldn't tell the American people how much they want to increase their taxes. They wouldn't tell the American people they were going to cut anything because that might make somebody unhappy and be unpopular. They would just call up the Ryan budget and attack Republicans as wanting to kill Medicare. What an irresponsible thing. And produce nothing in response. They don't have any plan to fix the situation we're in. And I'm disappointed about that. I think it's unthinkable that we would be recessing and going home for a week without commencing markup hearings in the Budget Committee to produce a budget that we're required by law to produce. It's unthinkable that we would do that. So I'll be presenting to the Majority Leader a letter today from senators on our side of the aisle. Large numbers of senators have already just signed it and says we don't need to go home until we've confronted this problem. And you've shown us how we're going to move forward to meet our statutory responsibility to pass a budget. I think that's reasonable, and that's what we're going to be asking today. And I'm not going to vote to go home without having met our duty. We call up our young men and women in uniform. We say, you will go to Iraq for a year. And they say, well, I'd rather not go. It's in your contract. You signed up. You have to go. It's your duty. And they say, yes, sir, and they go. Many of them have lost lives and limbs that we ought to remember this Memorial Day. So don't we have a duty? Don't we have a duty here? I think we do. I think we have a duty to the United States of America to produce a budget, whether or not it's law. But it's law, too. And this is the code book in which it's found, the United States Code. That's our duty. We don't need to be going home until we fulfilled it. And we have a plan to go forward with it. So I just want to say that this is not a little bitty matter with me. We're not going to have 4 votes as we did yesterday, and then that's just going to go away, and the majority leader is going to say, see, it's foolish to produce a budget. I told you we couldn't produce a budget. We're just not going to fool with having a budget this year. It's been 757 days since the Senate has had a budget because the majority leader didn't bring up a budget last year either. Does anybody have any wonder about why we're going to have a $1,500 billion deficit this year? Why 40 cents of every dollar we spend is borrowed? We spend $3.7 trillion and we take in only 2.2. And experts and financial wizards all over the world are telling us, what are you doing in the United States? You're about to threaten the world's most prominent economy, and it could have worldwide ramifications. Our debt to GDP compares with Portugal and Spain, almost as high as Greece. It'll be 100% by September 30th of this year, our debt to gross domestic product. And we're going to go away again without a budget. And the people who've asked to be given a leadership responsibility in the Congress can't even comply with the Budget Act. They refuse to stand before the American people and say what they want to tax, what they want to spend, what they want to cut. Because it wouldn't be popular. It would be foolish. I don't think so. It's not acceptable. You ask to be the leader of this Congress. You ask to be the President of the United States. You have a responsibility to submit a responsible budget, an honest budget, a fact-based budget, a budget the American people have an opportunity to understand, to read and study before we vote. And if it's not a good vote, they need to know we cast a bad vote, and they need to throw some people out of Congress. They threw some people out last fall. You would have thought we would have gotten the message. Doesn't look like it. Business as usual. We're in denial. We don't have to change. Oh, no, you can't cut this spending program. What do you mean you can't cut spending programs? Give me a break. The Alabama governor, Dr. Bentley, just had to announce a 15% reduction in discretionary spending. Proration of spending in Alabama, reducing it by 15%. Why? He didn't have the money. Is that something we've forgotten in Washington? When you don't have money, you shouldn't spend it? Well, you say, you know, it's all because of this economy or something else. Look, under President Obama, non-defense, discretionary spending in 2 years went up 24%. And we're going broke, and we're increasing spending on all the government programs on average. In 2 years, we've increased it 24% over 12% a year. You know, if you double, if your interest is 7% on your money, the value of your money will double in 10 years. At 12%, I guess the size of government would increase double in 6 or 7 years. Great Scott. No wonder people are upset with us. So we've been spending incredibly recklessly. And also the 12% increase I mentioned, the 24% increase in 2 years, that does not include the stimulus package, the almost $900 billion stimulus package that was thrown out the door with almost no oversight, and it was just designed to spend. And do you remember it was supposed to stimulate the economy? And we've had the slowest rebound from a recession we probably have ever had, I think ever had. It's been a very shaky recovery. And they'll say, well, we should have spent more. But Rogoff and Reinhardt, the professors, tell us when your debt gets as high as that in the United States, when that gets that high, then you can't, you begin to show a decline in growth. 1% of GDP growth is reduced when your debt reaches 90% of GDP, and we reached that this year, and we'll go to 100% by September 30th. So this is the budget that was submitted to us. They got a big staff over there. They maintain it. Many of them have been there a lot of years, and the President submitted us a budget. It was rejected yesterday, 97-0. And it confirms the fact that we don't have a legitimate budget before us. The President's budget has been rejected utterly. The Democrats have refused to produce one. Well, why don't you just have the hearing and offer your budget? I can't call a hearing. The chairman calls the hearing. Majority leaders confer and tell the chairman when to call hearings, and they've decided not to call a budget hearing so that we don't even have an opportunity to go to the budget committee and pass a budget. We had such tremendous interest in a lot of the new people who got elected to the Senate last fall. They wanted to be on the budget committee. They'd travel their states. They'd heard from their people all over their states that they wanted us to control spending. They wanted to be on the committee. And so it was the committee which had more interest and more people pushing to be on it than any other committee. And we finally selected a fabulous group of people to serve on the committee. Now we don't meet. Now we're not even going to mark up a budget. What a disappointment for those new members coming here with vim and vigor and ready to do something about the future of the Republic. You know, one of the things that was interesting about the President's budget that they all voted down is how much praise it got from our Democratic colleagues who voted it down last night when it came out. This is what Senator Schumer said about it. This is a responsible proposal. I believe this approach should have bipartisan support. Senator Bill Nelson, I personally think the President's budget is a step in the right direction. Senator Max Baucus, the President's budget strengthens our economy. Senator Ben Cardin, President Obama has given us a credible blueprint. Senator Tom Carper, the President's budget is an important step forward. Senator Frank Lautenberg, President Obama's budget presents a careful evaluation of what our nation needs. They all voted no last night. Well, you know, with friends like that, you don't need enemies, as they like to say. Well, what about Mr. Erskine Bowles, the man President Obama chose to serve as chairman of the Debt Commission? Mr. Bowles talked about the budget. He was rather stunned, actually, when it came out. It came out, I think, on Friday. And on Sunday, Mr. Bowles said, it comes nowhere close to where they will have to go to avoid our fiscal nightmare. Can you imagine that? This was the man President Obama chose to head the Deficit Commission, and he hammered this budget. Said it's nowhere close, and it's nowhere close to doing what we have to do. So I just believe that what we went through yesterday was a sham, a mockery, a joke, had no meaning. It was nothing but politics. It was nothing but an avoidance of responsibility to help provide leadership. Now, look, we all know some serious choices have been made, and I'll have to be made, and I'll close with these thoughts. We're going to need a partnership in the Senate between our parties. There are going to be some tough choices to be made. In my view, we simply cannot continue at our rate of spending, and it's got to be reduced. But we have people in denial. They do not think it has to be reduced. But when your lowest deficit in 10 years is projected to be $740 billion, and this year's deficit will be the highest in the history of the Republic, $1,500 or so billion, maybe more. They were saying $1.6 trillion more recently. So how do we get there? We're going to have to make some work. So I've saluted the Gang of Six that tried. Apparently it's fallen on hard times and the prospects aren't good for that. Okay. Now the Vice President is meeting. There's some excuse, they say, that we don't have to do openly and before the public what our business is and stand up and be accounted, because that won't work. People are afraid to make tough choices and make tough decisions in public. Well, I think the American people are not happy with us. I know they're not happy with us. 70% believe this country is on the wrong track, and the biggest part of that surely is our fiscal management of this country. They know this debt cannot be sustained. And so we need to do something. The best way to do it is to follow the regular order, to follow the legally constituted method of budget processes. Let's have a budget committee. If the Gang of Six has got some ideas, let's have them brought up in the budget committee and vote on them. If Vice President Biden wants to send something over, I'm glad to hear it. If the President wants to send his team down to defend this thing, has been rejected 97-0, let's hear him come down and defend it. I tell you what he said and what his budget director, Mr. Lieu, said. They said, can you believe this? They said this budget will allow us to live within our means and not spend money we don't have. That's the way they promoted this budget that was rejected last night. If it caused us to live within our means, they even said it would allow us to pay down our debt. If it did that, I would vote for it. Didn't come close. Nowhere close to that. Yet the President talked about it all over the country, and his staff ran around saying this budget is going to allow us to live within our means. And it's totally inaccurate. That's irresponsible. What the President should have done, and what our Democratic leaders have to help us with, is they've got to go to the American people and with clarity, without equivocation, say we cannot continue. Big changes have to be made. We don't like it. We're so sorry that this Congress and this country has gotten in the shape we are, but we've got to save it, and we're going to make some choices. We urge you to help us stick together so we can do it and put the country on the right path. Well, what do we have? We have, when Congressman Ryan in the Republican House had the temerity, the courage and the discipline and sense of duty sufficient to pass a budget that would actually do what needs to be done, they call it up and attack it with everything they have and not produce anything of their own. I think that's a failure of leadership. Cannot be denied, in my view, and I believe we're going to process we're on now is dangerous. It's not public. It's secret. They tried to produce a secret plan to comprehensively reform immigration. American people got on that, and down it went. They tried to negotiate in secret this health care reform bill. They were able to hold their votes on a straight party line vote, 60-40, the bill passed, but the American people were not happy. They weren't happy with the process, they weren't happy with the results, and a lot of people who participated in that spectacle didn't come back after this last election. So that's not the path that we're hearing from our constituents. Our constituents are saying, you work for us. We want to see you publicly stand up and defend the values we believe in. And if you don't do so, we're going to hold you accountable. I think that's democracy in America. I think it's healthy. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I respect the American people who are watching Congress and demanding we change the trajectory we're on. So, Mr. President, I believe strongly that we need to do better. I believe strongly that this Congress should have in play and commence, before we recess or not recess, a plan to deal with the financial crisis our nation faces. When we do that, we can feel like we're fulfilling our duty, both in law and morally, to the people who've given us the honor of serving in this body. Thank the Chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Illinois is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that we suspend the are we in a quorum?
The Senator is correct. We are without objection so ordered.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President, last week I spoke on the floor regarding the resignation of Mr. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, due to the serious criminal charges he is now facing in New York State. Mr. Strauss-Kahn has since resigned, but it appears that he will now receive at least a $250,000 taxpayer-funded severance pay package from the IMF and may be eligible for further undisclosed amounts from annual IMF retirement benefits. Since the United States is the largest contributor to the IMF, we now face the potential scenario where the American taxpayer is partly underwriting severance payments and retirement packages to a man who is pending criminal conviction as a felon. It's clearly unacceptable, and it is my hope that the United States Executive Director to the IMF, Meg Lunzinger, advocates that no future benefits pass to Mr. Dominique Strauss-Kahn if he is convicted of the crimes with which he is charged. Mr. President, as you know, the IMF is now spearheading efforts to manage a very wide and deep European debt crisis. Despite my reservations about U.S. taxpayer bailouts for Greece, for Ireland, and for Portugal, the institution does play a very critical role in financial leadership, and I think it needs to set an example, especially with regard to its now disgraced leader. Mr. Strauss-Kahn has clearly failed to live up to the expectations of his institution and what the American taxpayers support. And with that, I'd like to turn to a separate subject. Mr. President, the U.S. Treasury is scheduled to borrow over $1.4 trillion this year, and we have a scheduled interest payment of over $220 billion. We will pay more in interest this year than we do for the cost of the United States Army. I am very concerned about this situation and also an underreported financial situation developing in American states. The situation in my home state of Illinois and the state of California is the most dire. I would regret any attempt by these states to seek a federal bailout. To defend the full faith and credit of the United States, I think that we should move forward with a resolution that I introduced with a number of other senators, S-Res 188, that expresses the sense of the Senate that we should have no federal bailout for the states. This is an issue that has concerned the Senate once before. In the 1840s, we faced a funding crisis of the states. The United States Senate wisely advised then Secretary of Treasury Daniel Webster to seek or report on any discussions that he might have had that could have led to guaranteeing state debt. It was the Senate's expressed resolution that prevented Treasury Secretary Webster from bailing out the states then. The crisis at the time was even reflected in Charles Dickens' famous book, A Christmas Carol, in which Scrooge was described as someone who was less than wealthy because he had overinvested in what were called United States sovereigns. In fact, the phrase in The Christmas Carol is, "not worth a United States sovereign," because of the spendthrift policies of many state governments at the time. The U.S. Senate at that time took the correct action to prevent the spendthrift actions of several states from contaminating and ruining the credit rating of the United States itself. Our credit rating is already under stress, with reports especially by Standard & Poor's that we may face a loss in the AAA credit rating invented to symbolize the strength of the United States if we don't change a spending course soon. A way to accelerate that loss of a AAA credit rating is to guarantee or somehow bail out spendthrift states like Illinois or California. In Illinois, we have a very courageous state treasurer who just took office and made a clear statement. Treasurer Dan Rutherford has told the leaders of my own state that they need to stop borrowing, that they need to stop spending, and he is seeking no federal bailout for his state. The state situation is quite dire. By one estimate, the revenues and pensions of the state of Illinois are the worst funded in America. Less than 40% of the pensions, by one estimate, have been funded. With this type of track record, you could see a situation in which California or Illinois, in a crisis, would seek a bailout from the Senate and from the House. I think we should repeat the wise precedent set in the 1840s, the advice that we sent to Treasury Secretary Daniel Webster, to set a clear marker for our own Treasury Secretary to make sure that there is no bailout for the states. To protect our credit rating, I think this action is necessary, especially to reassure the credit rating agencies. And what would happen if we don't? Could we provide temporary benefits to Illinois and California? We could. Could we underwrite their policies of spendthrift ways? We could. Would we accelerate a loss of the AAA credit rating of the United States? We could. We're already seeing an example of what happens when you drive your national economy off a cliff. Many of us originally hail from, our longtime ancestors and past, from Ireland. And recently, the Irish government finances collapsed as they lost their credit rating. Because interest rates spiked in that country so fast, 53% of mortgages in Ireland were foreclosed in a short space of time after the loss of their credit rating. We need to act to protect the people of the United States from such an economic fate. That's why we need to say no to any state bailouts, why we need to cut spending here in Washington, and why we need to make sure that at all costs we defend the credit rating of the United States. It's our sacred duty here to make sure that what is befalling the people of Greece and the people of Portugal and the people of Ireland, being misruled by governments that said yes to every special interest spending idea, and no to their economic future does not infect the credit rating of the United States. That's why this resolution is needed, and that's why I'm so proud to introduce it today in the full and complete historic financial tradition of the United States Senate. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back.
President.